Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, January 11th, 2021, 2022. Sorry about that. I know with the new year, it's a bit difficult to get transitioned into everything, but I promise you I will get it down to a T over the next couple of videos and obviously for the remainder of the year. But looking at today's latest polling numbers, something really jumped out to me from these new polls from Detroit News that came with the Michigan governor's race with potential matchups against Governor Gretchen Whitmer with four actually potential Republicans there. I couldn't count for a moment in these brand new polls that tell us a very interesting story that actually goes against what we have been expecting and what we have seen on the national and statewide averages in a number of close and competitive races. Now, seeing the Michigan governor's race so lopsided in favor of the Democrats at face value, something must have changed. And we'll talk about what actually did change between polling numbers from September, from months before, from even potentially the beginning of the year, looking at the state of Michigan trend over time. You know, the Michigan governor's race was always meant to be an opportunity for the Republican Party to pick up, but right now they aren't even within a well range. And seeing the lead for Gretchen Whitmer increase as Republican candidates become more increasingly unknown, I would caution against saying that this means that, for instance, that, James Craig is the most electable candidate because he is at 39%. The only real problem here for the rest of these Republicans is name recognition. People do not know who they are, so they're not going to be comfortable saying, I will vote for them in the general election. Obviously, the state of Michigan is not just 31% Republican. There is a significant significant amount of people in Michigan that lean towards the right or would identify closer to the Republican Party than they do the Democratic Party. And to assume that at this point, there's only 31% of them just really isn't painting the whole picture. So I would say any of these Republicans, by the time we reach the general election, would likely be just equally as competitive as James Craig, but maybe there is some type of individual advantage of already starting out with that name recognition, which definitely can be explored. But the main takeaway here is that Gretchen Whitmer, for whatever reason, is suddenly soaring high, and I mean that seriously. Look at these numbers. I mean, seeing Gretchen Whitmer in a position where she is up 10 points against the leading GOP challenger really is telling us everything that we need to know, at least of where she stands right now. The Michigan governor's race seemed to have turned away from the Republican Party being in the advantage and has really warped my view in a very different way about this Michigan governor's race. I really thought it would be holding up to what the national numbers are telling us, that Joe Biden is unpopular, that Democrats are down in the generic ballot, and for many races that is the case. For many races, what you do see is that Democrats are losing support across a number of them, but that specifically in Michigan just doesn't seem to be the case. Despite Republicans being ahead by 1.6%, Gretchen Whitmer is polling exactly how she was in 2018 when Democrats were up in the generic ballot by 9-10 percentage points. Looking at the Michigan governor's race, you can see that she was ahead. In the Detroit News poll, the exact same pollster that is using their own methodologies and questioning that they are using for 2022, they found that Whitmer was up by 12 points on the state of Michigan against Bill Schuette. This advantage ultimately resulted in an 8.5% victory across the state, which means that there was a reduction in support of 3.5%. But that reduction in support isn't really that much, especially when you're up 12 percentage points. And to see her up by way more than 3.5% in all of these potential matchups means that even if you shifted the way that it was wrong in 2018, you still show Gretchen Whitmer winning re-election by a pretty substantial amount, near exactly what it was in 2018, despite the national environments being completely polar opposites. And I think this might be a testament to Gretchen Whitmer. I've been looking through her website, trying to see what her main priorities and what her main things are for the re-election bid that she has here. This is her campaign website. This is not her official government or governor's website here from the state of Michigan. This is her trying to vie for re-election in 2022. And she prioritizes things such as saving lives and helping Michigan's economy recover quickly. She's referring to COVID-19 and a number of other things, talking about creating 11,000 new auto jobs, a huge thing to the state of Michigan. I mean, that's why President Obama soared in popularity across the state after the auto bailout. I mean, these things are so important to Michigan voters, and she seems to be hitting it right on the money. I mean, Gretchen Whitmer is clearly doing something right, and it seems like this type of strategy is working well for her, at least right now. And seeing what these polls are telling us, it shows that, at least in the headline, that her job approval trends are up as the 2022 election looms. It finds that 56% of Michigan voters approve of the job that Gretchen Whitmer is doing as governor, compared to 38.7% disapprove. Now, I can't tell you exactly why the approval rating puts her in a positive position. I think that there is definitely a position that needs to be, there are circumstances that need to be acknowledged, resurgence of COVID-19, possibilities of closures and school shutdowns, things of that nature. And if Gretchen Whitmer isn't actually cracking down on COVID as she did previously, at least back when there was no vaccine and there was no booster shots or anything of that nature, or at least not widely spread, she is going to be more popular because people are tired of the pandemic. Believe it or not, obviously, I think we all are, but I do think that it is a fair statement to say that there are voters out there that, while entirely believing in the science, entirely believing in the vaccine, and they trust Dr. Anthony Fauci, they trust the CDC, they're still going to be tired of the pandemic. I mean, a lot of people do want to see a full and complete return to in-person normalcy. People want their kids to go back to school. They don't want to be online for quote unquote 2 weeks. We've all heard that before, right? So seeing Gretchen Whitmer, and I think a number of other governors, not really on the Democratic side, not really crack down as hard as they did previously, definitely improves their approval rating. But that's not the only thing. I think Gretchen Whitmer, for whatever reason, and I can't tell you perfectly because I'm not from the state of Michigan, nor have I been closely tracking what she has done in the state. I mean, she has just won governor's race after all in the 2022 midterms. But this performance from her, this ability of her to turn around the way that voters view her, is definitely a testament to her as a strong candidate for re-election in 2022. I mean, no one can look at these numbers and say Gretchen Whitmer is in a bad position. At this point in time, she is exactly where she was back in 2018. And that's insane to think about because it seems as if the state of Michigan is resilient to what the national average is telling us. It seems that for whatever reason, Whitmer is able to withstand how unpopular Joe Biden is that she's able to put herself in a position where voters are still supporting her, despite not supporting Biden, despite not supporting potentially other down-ballot Democrats, but here they are embracing Gretchen Whitmer yet again with open arms. And seeing the difference here, they actually compared it to older polling numbers. Now, this is the thing that's a bit surprising. It shows that 40% of voters want to re-elect Whitmer, 42% want a new person in office, but 12% are in that depends column. And right now, she is winning that depends column by a pretty substantial amount. They talk about name ID. They talk about those who are well known across the state. James Craig is right now the leading frontrunner for the GOP nomination. If you want to know who he is, I believe he was the former police chief. Yes, former head of the Detroit Police Department. He's running on a huge campaign vilifying and attacking Democrats for being associated with the defund the police and the abolish the police campaigns that rose out of response, or not necessarily rose out of response, rose in popularity because there were pushes and social changes being implemented and pushed for before. But the point is that this is a direct response to what we saw as a result of the Black Lives Matter protests that really took hold of America in 2020 during the months of May, June, and July, and August, and still have very much continued throughout the past couple of years. And seeing now how James Craig still can't even defeat Gretchen Whitmer, trying to use this strategy, trying to make Democrats and members of the left wing seem extremists when it comes down to police, when it comes down to racial equity. These things clearly aren't working through James Craig. And it might be a warning sign for the GOP that, and as of what I've been saying, that they should look to someone else besides Donald Trump as their own type of mold, as their own type of blueprint for what their campaign should look like. While it may work in Michigan, and I use the word may to point out the fact that it's not working right now, but there's a possibility that it does work in the future. I also think that there are other Republicans out there that have done very well in a Biden presidency that could turn their governor's races around if they were following the blueprint or the mold of what other governor's candidates have done in the past. And the one person I'm referring to in specific is Governor Glenn Youngkin from the 2021 Virginia's governor's race. I think most of us all should know him. And he has definitely done very well. As someone who has remained a Republican outsider while also being a perfect Republican insider, I think it just goes to show that there is a significant amount of Republicans out there, at least, that like Youngkin, that also don't necessarily associate him heavily with President Trump, but that's okay. For the rest of these Republicans, they are out here trying to win over the masses by only associating themselves with President Trump. They don't want to be associated with the swamp Republicans or the traditional type of Republicans because they don't think that's electable. But as we've seen so far, James Craig is definitely trying to embody President Trump, or at least embody some of the resources and some of the strategies that he used to win in 2016 for obvious reason, but it doesn't always work. And Gretchen Whitmer, I think, being up 10 points against him is a testament to that. Now, if we take a look at Gretchen Whitmer's turnaround amongst voters here, we can find, let's go ahead and see where the change actually is. They mention the independent voters here. The improvement in her approval rating actually comes from independent voters. I think one thing that we do know is that Democrats and Republicans don't think alike. They rarely ever cross over, and that's why bipartisan performance and bipartisan, congressional working is very, very rare. But independent voters sway elections, and while they have very little representation on the congressional level, governor elections, presidential elections, and in many of those congressional elections, they have a say in who ends up winning. Now, independent voters in Michigan are about a third of the voting group in the state. You know, across the country, in fact, independent voters definitely do better than in terms of overall registration. And registration, you don't register under an independent party. You register unaffiliated or independent, depending on your state. I think in the state of Maryland, it's unaffiliated. But the point is that you're not tied to a political party. And the reason why this characterization has risen in popularity is because people don't always want to decide. But they do tend to swing elections pretty substantially. As you can see, they are just swinging an individual poll ahead of the actual election. In September of 2020, and this was over a year ago from when this poll was taken, so September 2020 going all the way to January of 2022, 51.2% of independents disapproved of her performance as governor. Disapproved. Now, 27.9% disapprove. 62.3% of independent voters approve of Gretchen Whitmer's performance as governor. That is a 45-point reversal. Isn't that insane? And amongst independent voters, if you're wondering, oh, maybe they just got a more Democratic sampling group, what you find is that Joe Biden only has a 39.4% approval amongst independent voters. So obviously it's going to be lower than what the national numbers are telling us, and this actually works perfectly with what the national average was. In the 2020 election, Joe Biden won by 4.5%. In the state of Michigan, he won by 2.8%, which means that the approval rating should be slightly lower than what it is on the national numbers, and that's exactly what it is, at least amongst independent voters. And I think that tells you a lot about what you need to know. The independent voters in Michigan, while disapproving of Joe Biden, seem to really like what Gretchen Whitmer is doing. And that's what's driving her into this re-election bid. And looking at other polls, I mean, she is doing better than where she was before. You can find that in old polling data that Gretchen Whitmer wasn't exactly winning by as much, at least, as she could have. In some of these nonpartisan or Republican-leaning pollsters, Republicans were ahead, or Gretchen Whitmer was only ahead by just a few percentage points, at least against James Craig. When you look at the rest of the candidates, again, you don't really have much name ID. One person in particular who really could change the race is John James, who has been floated as a potential candidate for the Michigan governor's race in 2022, but honestly, that is all up in the air right now. He definitely seems to be gearing up a bid, but he has yet to announce it, so we're not going to treat it as if it is a done deal yet, because James Craig still is a pretty substantial candidate to run on the GOP side, which means John James will have some serious primary competition, despite him being the Republican nominee for Senate in 2018 and 2020. Gretchen Whitmer defeats John James by 5 points, even with a Republican pollster. Defeats him by 10 points back in May of 2021. But you will see here is that some of these numbers have actually improved from May of 2021. They have improved from June. They have improved from August and September. And they've come to a point where right in the worst time, and the best time for Democrats, the worst time for the GOP, Republicans should be doing very well here. This definitely changes the trajectory of the race, and it makes them a lot less confident about how this race is actually going to go. And looking at historical elections across the state of Michigan, in 2014, which was a red wave year, a year in which Republicans were winning in Maryland, they were winning in Massachusetts. I mean, they were having resounding victories across the country. They were winning in Illinois. They were decimating the Democratic Party. But you know what happened in the state of Michigan was that Michigan was only decided by 4.1%. I mean, looking at the older elections, in 2010, it was very different. In 2010, Rick Snyder won by 18.2. But by the time he became increasingly more unpopular, it was very difficult for him to win in 2014. But he did it because of the national environment, but only narrowly. I mean, Michigan should have been an overwhelmingly large victory. Even with some other unpopular governors as the Republican nominee in this year, they still performed very well. I mean, it really doesn't make sense that Michigan and Maryland were near equal in terms of the Republican Party's victory. It also doesn't make sense that Ohio was going 31 points to the right and Michigan was just going by 4. And in 2018, of course, we know how this result went. Michigan went to the Democratic Party by 9.6%. It was nearly a 10-point victory across the state. So it was a pretty substantial victory. And actually, that's a bit different than what Real Clear Politics is telling us here. So I don't know if they actually update the final results as often as they do, but that's actually better news for Gretchen Whitmer. If anything, that increases her chances of victory because the Detroit News poll had her up 12 points. And if she did win by 9.6, that means she's probably ahead potentially by 8-9 points across the new polls that have been released by the Detroit News pollster here. But the main takeaway is that Democrats are doing well in the state of Michigan. To my surprise, it is something that I would say also not just to my surprise, maybe to the surprise of Gretchen Whitmer and many other Republicans besides the top candidates here. I think everyone is shocked by what these polls are telling us. Maybe not necessarily the native Michigan voters. Maybe they know it better than me, obviously, because they're from the state. But seeing this from an outsider's perspective, seeing this as someone who is having some type of analysis or punditry on the race itself, it is very shocking to see that Gretchen Whitmer is able to withstand, in the same day, a poll that shows that Joe Biden is disapproved of by 19% more Americans than he is approved of across the national average. And yet, the Michigan governor's race remains the exact same as it was during a Democratic wave year. I'm excited to see a lot more polling from this state. I think that there definitely needs to be a bit more analysis and a bit more investigation into how the race stands right now. But as one of the few nonpartisan polls that have been released throughout this year, it tells us something very different than what the partisan Republican pollsters have been telling us. Even though many of them show Gretchen Whitmer ahead, these show some very substantial victories and things that cannot be ignored. Because if the Republican Party wants a very real opportunity at a pickup in Michigan, they need to start cracking down on this lead, and they need to start increasing name ID across the state. You cannot win a governor's race or any type of election without being a recognizable name if you're in a swing state. That's just simply not how it works. And Michigan is going to be the center front of many campaigns by the Democratic Party in an effort to continue to hold the Rust Belt and win with the candidates there. They have an incumbent as they do in Wisconsin. They don't have one in Pennsylvania, but they're going to try to win all 3 of them, and they might. Michigan definitely seems to be the most realistic and the easiest for them to win, but only time will tell. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.